Good morning. It's been a little bit that we've been on Zoom together. I'm thrilled that you all are here and even more excited about partnering with the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce this morning to bring you this program today. It's a very important subject for our current times, right? And our current workplace issues and concerns. So I think this will be a very informative program this morning, and I'm thrilled that you all are here. If you don't know me, my name is Emma Potler. I am with Delaware SHRM. We are Delaware's organization for HR professionals. And many of you know me already, but some of you don't. I'm here, and also my colleagues, Kim Hamill is our incoming president. She starts her term in January 2024 as our president. And Amanda Boone is on as well. She is our current president and has served for the past 2 years. So they are here with us as well. And I see a couple of our board members on as well. So thank you so much. I won't keep you much longer. I will say today's webinar is offering continuing education credits. You will get 1 SHRM or 1 HRCI credit for attending. And I will share that with you at the end of today's session in the chat. Just be ready to copy that or write it down. And it will also be sent out in the follow-up email after this webinar. So I want to make sure you get your credit for attending. We do have a couple of exciting events coming up after this, including our big landmark event of the year, which is our annual conference. And if you are in HR, this is an event you cannot miss. For sure. All of the top leaders in our region will be present. We're actually expecting over 300 people to be there. So it's going to be really exciting at the Chase Center on the Wilmington Riverfront. And the dates are November 14th and 15th. So if you want more information about that, send me a message, or I will also share the details in our follow-up email to this. So I won't delay you any further. I want to turn it over to Mike Quaranta, the president of the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Mike.
Good morning. Thank you, Emma. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Quaranta. I'm president of the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for the partnership with SHRM. We're always grateful to do things with Delaware SHRM. We're really excited. So I'm going to get right into this and introduce our speaker today, so Molly can take it from here, because that's why you're all here. Molly DiBianca is the member in charge of the Clark Hill, Wilmington, Delaware office. She is a graduate of the University of Delaware and the Villanova Law School. Molly's a chamber member. We're excited to have her talk about this. She's got a practice that focuses on a number of things, but employer law is one of the things that she's expert in. So Molly, without further ado, let me turn it over to you. And we look forward to your presentation and then some subsequent questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I see lots of familiar names in the participant list today, so it's super nice to see many of my old friends and folks that we've worked together for a lot of years now. And thanks to Mike for remembering that once upon a time I was actually young enough to be in college, which kind of blows my mind. All right, here's what we're going to talk about today. Weed, marijuana is legal in the state of Delaware, and how does that impact employers, us, right? So I've been doing employment side litigation and counseling for 20 years. How does this affect my clients? I'm going to give you the benefit of having thought about this quite a bit, and the benefit of sort of the collective group thought insofar as all of my clients are dealing with the same thing that you are thinking about and that we're going to be talking about today. So hopefully I'm going to be able to give you some collective wisdom that I've already acquired during in the interim since the marijuana legalization laws have been passed. So let's jump in and get started. With regard, let's see if I can get a slide to her. I can. All right, here we go. So first, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the laws and the applicable laws that currently exist. Be aware that they are in flux or potentially in flux, at least on the federal level. Then we're going to talk about the application, how that really affects us in the workplace. I'm going to be giving some very specific examples in that section, in the application section. But of course, you all know me well enough now. I can talk forever, so you can just jump in at any time with your chat questions. And if I'm not answering them automatically, we'll get to them at the end. But hopefully, I'm going to cover everything as we go. So this is what we want to talk about: hiring, testing, impairment, all those things in the workplace. So let's turn first to the applicable laws. Currently, and I stress the word currently, the federal law is, as you know, it prohibits marijuana, right? Marijuana is illegal under federal law. My firm, the firm that I'm with, Clark Hill, is an international firm, and we have an entire group of lawyers devoted to cannabis law. One of them is Robert Hogan. He has been in this space. He's in Colorado rather, and he has been in this space for 15 years. He's written the regulations for Germany. He's working right now with Hungary, travels internationally to help people, help jurisdictions, states, countries manage their process in going legal and taking weed legal. And I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably all day, marijuana and weed. It's going to be an old habit that's going to be very hard for me to break. So you're going to give me a little bit of a pass on that today. But let me just say, the enforcement on federal, as we all know, is about zero, right? The reality is that this may be changing. There is a federal movement right now to legalize, to declassify, I will call it, to declassify from the schedule, the marijuana and cannabinoid products. So it's in flux, but right now it's still illegal, right? So how does that work when you've got a federal law that says it's illegal and you've got a state law that says you can't get in trouble for using it? Well, let's talk about that. There are three relevant laws in Delaware. So we have the medical marijuana law, which came out first. I know everyone that's here from SHRM is going to be super familiar with that medical marijuana law, but I am going to talk about it briefly because it's still one that I get a lot of questions on. So medical marijuana is one, it's a standalone. And then we have how the legalization came to be. It was in two bills, House Bill 1 and House Bill 2. House Bill 1 deals with the legalization of marijuana. House Bill 2 deals with the sales. So we're not at sales yet because the dispensaries have not been able to open. They won't be able to open for more than, I think it's a year now. We're still outside of the year period. So we've got time before the sales kicks in. And our new state commissioner, Kook, we've got time here for him and his team to get up to speed to get these regulations in place. But in the meantime, we as employers have to deal with the legalization that exists right now. So let's talk about that. All right, House Bill 1, that's the one we're going to focus on the most. Took effect in April, day before my son's birthday, so it's an easy one for me to remember. Governor Carney, for many of you, you may remember that he last year did not go along with he vetoed the legalization bill. This year when it passed in the House in Dover, he said, he did not say, he did not sign, right? So it's called letting it sit in the desk drawer, and that's perfectly one way to get a bill into law, is to not, the governor does not sign it after a certain number of days, it automatically takes effect. So the governor didn't endorse it. The governor did let it pass though. So it did not, it was not vetoed and it's in effect. So we have this law that's in effect. Why? What were the arguments made? Well, the arguments politically that were made were, first of all, we want to get the illegal market out, right? We want to make sure it's a safe product that if people are going to use it, we want them to be safe and to know what's in their products to make good decisions. So we want to get the illegal market out. Another reason is the criminal justice concerns. So particularly with regard to disparity in enforcement of drug laws in this country. Many of you may be familiar with that history and many of you may not, but it has a grossly disparate impact on minorities in the country. And so there is an adjustment that's trying to be made to rectify, or not rectify, but to equalize what has already occurred. So that's another concern. There's also a job market to be tapped into. Colorado and Washington State both have had legalization. As I said, Colorado's 15 years now. So we have a good data set there. And those states advertise and promote that they've had tremendous job creation because of the legalization of marijuana. So if that's the case, hopefully then Delaware can tap into that, some of that as well. The other thing is just the free marketplace, right? Competition is king. We've got neighbors and those neighbors are legalized. So if you cannot buy in Delaware and you are inclined to buy legal marijuana, but you can't do it here, you just go across the bridge and go to, trying to think, the closest dispensary from here would be Vineland, probably, New Jersey, and where you can stand outside and get in line with the rest of the folks and purchase marijuana legally. So if you can do it right across the bridge or across the state line into Maryland, for example, we want to be able to do it here. So the theory goes. So capitalism prevails and we want to have competition. So New York, New Jersey, Maryland are all legal. You have to think that Pennsylvania, given that that is a key part of the tri-state area, will follow suit shortly. We're not there yet, but to give you some perspective, when I say California was 15 years ago, 15 years ago was a long time, right? They have, relatively speaking, when we're talking about changing laws and culture, we have had a lot of data points that we can use from California. So the benefit of that experience is something that's important to tap into. And that's why I really rely on my folks in the cannabis industry group in California and Colorado to help us here in Delaware get up to speed and adapt to the new legalization market. All right. So HB1 has some important definitions that I do think you want to know. So the first one is, what is an adult? An adult for legalization purposes is going to be 21 years or older, right? So it's not 18, it's not the year of majority, which is 18. It's going to be 21 plus, just like alcohol. So it's an alcohol standard if you think of it that way. What is allowed as far as quantity goes? There's a term in the law that they use called personal use quantity. So you'll hear that a lot or read that a lot if you're looking at the bill. So let me tell you what that means. It basically means 1 ounce of leaf marijuana, or the equivalent thereof in a different form. So the equivalent of 1 ounce of leaf marijuana in the form of an edible or a vape, or any of the other formats of products. So if you have more than that, if you're dealing with more than that, it's not going to be considered personal use quantity, and it's not going to fall into this legalization permissible use category. But as long as you're within the 1 ounce or lower amount, that's going to be personal use and that's going to be protected. So what we're talking about is persons 21 and older with personal use quantities, meaning 1 ounce or less of marijuana. And if we're talking about that, here's what can be done and here's what can't be done. What is legal now is possession. So if an employee has possession in their, we're talking about their free time. So let's not say an employee, let's say Molly. Let's say Molly has half an ounce of marijuana at home. I can't be arrested for that. That's legal. So possession, having it is legal. Use, yes, you are allowed to use it as long as you are 21 plus, as long as you are you have less than 1 ounce, you're okay to use. Display, what display means is generally you can have paraphernalia on you or your person or in your vehicle. You know, paraphernalia, it's not going to be, you're not going to get in trouble for displaying. You're not gonna be able to display marijuana in your vehicle ever, but for example, if you have it on your person or you have it in your home, it's not going to be a problem for display. That includes both marijuana, the products, and the paraphernalia related thereto or for use therefore. Purchase, you can purchase it as long as, again, you're purchasing as an adult under 1 ounce. Now, where you can buy it, of course, is a different question. There's nowhere to legally buy it at this time in Delaware. The non-medical use dispensaries are not open. They won't be open until I think it's 18 months after the HB2 passed. So we've got time for purchase, but the law says it can be purchased, right? And it can be transported. So I can transport, if I buy it at a dispensary, when the dispensary becomes legal and I put it in my car and I take it home, that would be legal. That's not going to be a problem. Whereas before, these are all new things, right? Before, all of these things would have been illegal or unlawful, would have potentially gotten us in trouble. So what we can't do, those are the things we can do. Now, let me tell you the conditions on how they work. So for conditions on those uses, you cannot sell. So I cannot say if I have gone to New Jersey and purchased legally, and I come back to Delaware and I am in possession of 1 ounce of marijuana legally as a person 21 or older, I am not allowed to sell it to my neighbor, even if they too are 21 or older, right? You have to be a legal authorized distributor, seller under the law, and that is not a possibility for an individual now and at no time in the future under the bill. So selling it is not going to be legal. Gifting it with another transaction is not going to be legal. So they, at the SHRM conference on November 14th and November 15th, SHRM is not going to be able to give away, buy a ticket, buy 5 tickets, get an ounce of marijuana for free. That is not going to be legal ever under the statute. So where this comes into play, this is to me as a former restaurant owner, many of you know that, when I was in the restaurant business, this reminds me very much of the alcohol laws in Delaware. So we cannot say buy 1 drink, get 1 free, buy a bottle of wine, get 1 free. It's just the same way. So I couldn't say buy a gift certificate for $500 and I will give you a marijuana for free, right? That is going to be prohibited. So we're not going to be gifting marijuana as part of giveaways anytime soon. We'll be sticking with umbrellas and gift cards, I suppose. Consumption in a moving vehicle, no surprise there. Just like you're not allowed to consume alcohol when you're driving down the street, you are not allowed to smoke a joint driving down the street. Or even if you're not driving, if you're in a moving vehicle, you cannot consume any kind of marijuana product, regardless of the form. It also cannot be accessible in a vehicle. So if it's in a vehicle, it has to be locked away in a way that cannot be made accessible while you're driving it, which makes sense, right? That seems pretty rational to me. Consumption in public areas. So I cannot walk down the street, right? I'm on Market Street here in Wilmington. I cannot walk down Market Street and smoke a joint. That would be illegal. It's legal for me to possess it. It's legal for me to smoke at my home, but it's not legal for me to smoke it anywhere that is a public area. Okay. And that makes general common sense in a lot of ways. Growing, cultivating, manufacturing. So you can't be a home grower is what this means. So in the context of you can, there are a few you can't, and these are the you can't. HB2, that's regulation and licensure. That is a different thing than what we're going to be talking about, but that is the bill that governs if you want to be a seller in Delaware and how to go about to get your license as a dispensary sales. Again, my firm actually does that. We have an entire group of people who write these applications for different states, depending on the state that the person wants to apply in. And so that group will be dealing with this HB2 all day, every day, right? That's not what us as employers are going to be dealing with. The employers, SHRM, me, my clients, we're going to be dealing with HB1. But I mentioned HB2 just so everyone's sort of informed and on the same page. All right. I'm going to talk about medical marijuana. I know that everybody in SHRM is staying on top of the medical marijuana, but let me just indulge me because it is a tricky one and I still get lots of questions on it. So on the slide, what you should be seeing are the conditions that enable someone to get a medical marijuana license in the state of Delaware. Let me say that every state is different. Okay, I think we're up to 30 some states now that are legal. I could be wrong on that, but I want to say, no, I don't hold me to it. The number of states that has every state is different with medical marijuana. Every state has different conditions. Every state has different anti-discrimination rules. So do not assume that just because you've got a firm grasp on, for example, the New Jersey statute, that does not mean that you're going to have a firm grasp on the Delaware statute. I've done a few webinars on comparing the medical marijuana statutes across the country, and they are very, very, very different. So definitely don't assume that this is something that's super obvious. Let me go through them with you a little bit. The conditions that you see here are more limited than many states. So many states have broader categories of conditions. Delaware seems to me to fall into the sort of fairly limited category, but there are states, for example, Texas has very much fewer. I think there are 4 conditions in Texas that could qualify a person for a medical marijuana card. So we sort of fall in the middle towards the lower condition side. this is what, as far as the medical marijuana, we're only talking about licensed card holders who have medical marijuana cards. Even then, they may not use that, regardless of whether you have a medical marijuana card, you may not use medical marijuana if it is going to constitute professional malpractice. What does that mean? That means me, a lawyer, right? I have professional malpractice standards. Accountants, CPAs have professional malpractice standards. Certainly anyone in healthcare has a professional malpractice standard, right? There are standards of care. If there are standards of care, and if your person can be sued for malpractice, then they cannot use medical marijuana and engage in their profession at the same time, right? They cannot be under the influence of medical marijuana if doing so when they work would it put them at risk for a malpractice suit. The law actually says that. You cannot, even if you have a card, possess in any of these places, a school bus, a prison, a jail, a healthcare facility. So regardless of the medical card, if I have a medical card, I cannot go into a hospital and carry my medical marijuana with me. Okay? That may or may not seem instinctive, but that is absolutely the law. And then even if you have a medical marijuana card, you cannot smoke in any kind, I say smoke, but you cannot use in any kind of transportation, whether that's public transportation or your private transportation, your vehicle, and you cannot use in any public place. So those rules are pretty similar. With regard to prohibitions, you also, for medical marijuana, cannot operate any kind of moving vehicle, including a boat, an aircraft, etc., while you're under the influence, regardless of whether you have a card. And you can also not share your medical marijuana with a non-card holder. To give you some examples on that, there in New Jersey, their dispensaries have both a medical marijuana line and a legalization line. Those are my terms, not the dispensary's terms. So there are literally two different menus that you choose from in a dispensary in New Jersey. It's depending on whether you are a medical card holder or if you are merely just using for legalization for recreational purposes. If you have a card holder, you get options to, for example, gummies and edibles that are not available for legalization for just straight recreational purposes in New Jersey. So there is always going to be a little bit still of a distinction between the two purposes, even though they're going to overlap as well. All right. Anti-discrimination in employment. Here is the big thing for medical marijuana, and then we're going to switch into the legalization stuff. The big thing for medical marijuana is that an employer cannot discriminate in the terms of conditions in employment, right? Which all my SHRM friends know what that means. That means you can't make decisions about hiring or firing or discipline. Anything about the terms and conditions of employment based on the fact that the person has a medical marijuana card. So if a person shows up and says, I have a medical marijuana card and I want to apply for employment, the employer cannot say, nope, we don't hire people who have medical marijuana cards. Now, if you want to discriminate against an employee because of medical marijuana use or card holding status, you may, if and only if, this is the only exception in the law, is if the employer would lose money. If they didn't discriminate, it would lose money from the federal government for a federal, for example, a federal contract or a federal grant, or if they would lose some kind of licensing from the feds. So if you are someone who's a DoD contractor, that's going to give you some very good grounds to consider whether or not you want to prohibit medical marijuana use. But be aware that in a general sense, assuming that neither of those apply, neither you're going to lose money, federal money, nor you're going to have a federal licensing issue, assuming neither of those factors are present, then what happens? That means that if somebody comes in and says, hi, I have a medical marijuana license. I know that you guys test in pre-employment. I'm going to test positive, but it's because I have a card. What can you do with that? The answer is, I'll tell you what you can't do with that. You cannot say, sorry, we can't hire you, right? That is not what we have to do. They get to go through all the pre-employment hiring process, just like everybody else does. And if assuming that they do test positive for marijuana use in their pre-employment drug screen, they get a pass. Why? Because that's what that card basically is their pass. That medical marijuana license is their pass. we're not going to be able to discriminate unless either of those two conditions apply. So, and I can circle back at the end to the medical marijuana, but I do want to just put this out there. Now let me talk about legalization, and then we'll scoot on back if you have questions on that. Before I go to the legalization, let me just say, people ask me about whether if someone has a medical marijuana card, is that a disability that should be accommodated either under the ADA or under state anti-discrimination statutes? The answer is, at this time, under the federal law, it's not considered a federal disability at this time because it's illegal, right? So if the reality is, if someone has a disability, we're going to treat them, go through the entire interactive process, just like we normally would. And my bet would be in a few years, maybe 5 years, I don't need to say next year, but in the near future, in the foreseeable future, we will likely be at a place where this is seen as a reasonable accommodation of the federal law. But for right now, it's not. We're not there yet. So what does that mean as far as accommodation goes? The medical marijuana law in Delaware specifically provides that we do not have to allow, as an employer, anyone to use medical marijuana at work. We do not have to allow anyone to be impaired by medical marijuana at work. And we do not have to allow anyone to possess medical marijuana at work. So use, impairment, and possession at work all can be prohibited. The law says that. So if the law says I can refuse to allow a card holder to come to work and to have it on his or her person, or have taken it right before work or on their break, if I can prohibit that, that tells me that the state law is not requiring me to give an accommodation here. So at this time, I think it's safe to say there is not going to be a requirement that you are going to have to make accommodations in the traditional sense that most employers are used to hearing the word accommodations, with the exception of we cannot hire, we cannot fire, and we have to give exceptions on that drug test, right? So I cannot say I will not hire anyone with a card. I will not say I will fire you if I find out you have a card, and I must give you a pass if you have a card and you fail that drug test at some given time. But what I can do is I can say, but you cannot come to work high, you cannot be at work high, you cannot possess marijuana in the workplace at any time for any reason, and you cannot use it at work or during working time. So you have, as an employer, the ability to exclude, but during the workday, but you do not have the right to exclude the person as a candidate or as an employee merely because they hold the card. So hopefully that distinction is a little clear, is at least clear. All right, let's talk about how to deal with this, okay? So how to deal with medical, or rather with legalization at work. This is the way that I've come to think of it, and you guys know, many of you know me for all these years, you know how I like to dumb things down for my little tiny pea brain. So I'll give you the Molly pea-sized amount that I can sort of have formulated this little tiny crumb. Here's what I think of medical, or I think of legalization as in the workplace today. Think of it like alcohol, okay? In theory, so alcohol is legal if you are 21 years or older and you are not breaking the law, such as driving with alcohol in your car, driving while intoxicated or under the influence, etc. So within certain parameters, if a person is over 21, they are allowed to consume alcohol. Yes, yes. Now transfer that to the workplace. Are you allowed to consume alcohol? I'm over 21. Am I allowed to consume alcohol at work? No, of course not. Am I allowed to bring alcohol at work? Am I allowed to bring a cocktail and sit on my table here at my desk and look at it happily all day while I work? No, I'm not. I'm not allowed to. My current drug policy, I'm sure, says I'm not allowed to bring alcohol into the workplace and stick it in my desk drawer. It also says I'm not allowed to come to work impaired by alcohol, right? All of those rules should be applied in theory, and can be applied to legal weed, right? If I am an employer and I decide that I don't want employees to come to work impaired, I get to say, don't come to work impaired. If I'm an employer who says I don't want any marijuana in the workplace, that's fine. That's what we do with alcohol, and the same rules apply with marijuana. So I try to analogize them in a way that is effective. And I think that's an effective way to look at it, which is to say, would you let somebody do it with alcohol? If the answer is no, we don't, then that's probably a good way to say, I don't want to do it with marijuana. But what if you say, hypothetically speaking, of course, only, don't send me angry letters about this, but what if an employer said, we don't want to hire people who drink alcohol off duty? Now, you wouldn't have a lot of applicants, perhaps. It would certainly limit, I would think it's safe to say, it would limit your applicant pool, right? If you said, yes, alcohol is legal for those 21 and older, but we don't want to hire people who drink alcohol. Could you do that lawfully? Yes, 100% you can do that lawfully. That is absolutely legal. The question, of course, is, are you going to get any employees, right? And the question will be the same with marijuana. I don't know how long that's going to take. So I suspect it's going to be a little longer than right now, just because dispensaries are not open. But many of you, I am sure, who are active in HR right now have already gotten a candidate, or maybe two, who have said to you, hey, I smoke marijuana, and I just want to make sure it's legal. So I just want to make sure I'm not going to get in trouble with a pre-employment drug screen. I do have clients that are dealing with that already, and it's really hard for them. It usually happens, unfortunately, in the cases where they're desperately trying to get staff anyway. So if you are desperately trying to hire people on a regular basis, and now you've got candidates who are coming in and disclosing to you that they are legal, they use recreationally, which means legally, and they still want to be employed, and you say, well, we still want to hire this person. He or she has great credentials, great experience, and fits the job. Perfect. We want to hire them. Can you, or do you have to say, no, we're not going to? The answer is, it's up to you. Entirely up to you. It's entirely up to you as a private sector employer, whether you want to allow that, embrace it, or turn it away. So could you say, we understand it's legal, but we are not going to hire anybody who consumes marijuana recreationally? Yes, you can say that. Do you want to? It's up to you. It's going to be about your applicant pool and the size of it and how hard it is for you to get candidates. It's going to be about the sensitivities. If you're held privately, if you're an organization that has ownership at the top who's making decisions, without a board of shareholders or something like that, they're just able to make those decisions. It may just be something that they say, no, we don't want this. This doesn't fit with our values or our expectations. You're allowed to do that. A similar example for those of you who may remember, what was it, maybe 10 years ago, I guess, when you might remember this, some of the big rail companies started saying, we're not going to hire smokers. Remember that? And then that rolled in eventually to healthcare, started adopting that. In large part, large healthcare organizations would say, we're not going to hire smokers. We'll grandfather our current smokers in, but we're not going to hire new smokers. That's another way to do it. So try, when you get stuck thinking about the legalization question and in the employment context, try to analogize it to alcohol or cigarettes, right? That's a good way to sort of figure out, navigate whether or not those rules are going to get you into trouble. So can you decline to hire people who use recreationally? Yes. Can you say to people, we drug test, doesn't matter that it's legal, and we're not going to hire people who consume marijuana? Yes. It's entirely up to you. I will say I did see a meme that gave me a good chuckle the other day. It was a picture of Kermit the Frog with a little heading on top that said, look, he was interviewing for a job, and it said, I can either pass the drug test or I can get along well with others, but not both, right? That is something I think we're going to be hearing. In how long, I don't know. I had expected it, frankly, I had predicted it to be not until probably 2 years after the dispensaries were up and well running, but I'm not sure that I was right on that. I may have been quite a bit too far off just based on how many of my clients are already hearing the candidates coming in and in the interview addressing it forthrightly and saying, I use marijuana, and I assume this is not going to be a problem. So be aware. Can you do it? Can you just put a flat ban in? Yes, you can. Should you? That's going to be up to you. So can you ban, if you don't want to say, if you, for example, you say, we're going to take out the cannabinoid testing out of the drug screen. We're not going to test for marijuana use. can you still ban possession? Can you still ban consumption? Can you still ban impairment? Yes, yes, yes. Just like alcohol, right? That is the analogy that I always use. Can you say, we're going to let people who drink alcohol in their free time or who consume alcohol legally, we will let you work here, of course, but you cannot consume, you cannot possess, you cannot be impaired. Yes, of course, we do that in all of our drug policies. So that's the same for marijuana. You can absolutely do that. There's no problem with that. Best practices on that are going to be have your handbook, right? Your same drug policy. People are calling me and asking me, do we need to change our drug policy? The answer is probably not, depending on, maybe with the testing, if you're going to stop testing for that, for cannabinoids, maybe. But I suspect you still don't want people coming to work with drugs in their, and being impaired. You don't want them to possess drugs in the workplace. You don't want them to take drugs during the workday. All of those things are absolutely fine. So when people come and say, should we be rewriting our handbook? The answer is, let's look at it, but not necessarily, not necessarily. Can you still test? We just to sort of refresh, where do we test? We test during pre-employment, right? As drug screen at the time of hiring. We test random, some employers do random testing. Although I have to say that is certainly the number of my clients who are doing true random testing has vastly decreased over the past 2 decades, just tremendously. So as far as anything goes, but especially with cannabinoids. And then reasonable suspicions, if someone comes to work and seems impaired, can you send them for a drug test? Certainly, yes, absolutely. And then post-accident, yes, absolutely. So can you test? Yes, just like you could for anything else, you're allowed to test. That just because marijuana is legal does not change them. Now, what do you do if you get a test back that is positive? Because that does not tell you that the person is impaired at that moment. There is not a test for impairment. If you go to Colorado and you are pulled over for drunk driving, there's a test for impairment. If you go to Colorado and you get pulled over for being high, driving under the influence or while impaired due to marijuana consumption, there is not a street test for that. There's not an impairment test for that. So what do you do? How do you get the test? Well, how do you deal with a result that's positive? It's going to go back to whether you're prohibiting this at all. So if you are prohibiting employees from consuming, it doesn't matter if it's legal. If you're saying we don't hire people who use marijuana, legal or not, with the exception of medical, we don't hire people who use recreationally, then yes, the drug tests are still going to be effective. But if you're not prohibiting people from employment because of recreational, i.e. legal use of marijuana, then what good does the drug test do you? Probably not a lot is the truth, right? It's probably going to be more of a thorn in your side because now you've got this extra data that you don't want to deal with. So it's going to depend on what your organization wants to do. But if you are having trouble hiring people because people are using legal marijuana and that's messing up your drug testability, then you're going to have to consider skipping the drug test for that if that's where you are. Now remember, the one exception for testing for employers is if a person tests positive for marijuana and they have a medical marijuana card, they're not going to get in trouble, right? That's going to be a pass. Best practices, a lot of my clients wanted, and I think this is a great idea, frankly, to get in front of this and say, hey, we know that marijuana is legal, but these are our policies and our positions on it. That was an easy tack to take for those clients of mine who really do know that they are not changing course, right? So for example, construction is one that I think of. Healthcare is another industry that I think of. Those are the groups of clients that I am seeing say, we are not going to stop testing. We are prohibiting people from being impaired. We are prohibiting people from using outside of work. And if you come to work and test positive outside of medical marijuana card, you are going to be in trouble, right? So those employers wanted to get ahead of this and basically put out a memo or communication in advance and say, here's where we are, same place as ever. And just because weed is legal does not mean we're going to change our minds on that. But what if you're not sure? What if you're in the place that many of my clients find themselves in currently, which is, I don't know, are we going to get staff? I'm struggling to get staff right now. Many of my clients are telling me. So how am I going to get staff if I'm reducing my pool even more? Okay, wait it out and see. But either way, I really want my clients to either now evaluate it, please, but at least in 6 months to a year, do it again. Because things are going to be changing. And I think it's important that, especially at the HR level, where I say we collectively at HR, we are being impacted directly because we are the people who are supposed to hire and get candidates, etc. HR needs the opportunity to turn to management again in 6 months or a year and say, hey, we have to revisit this policy because it's just not practical anymore. The reality is that many of you, I'm sure, have already seen a real steep increase in the number of people with medical marijuana cards. The reality is they're not that hard to get. They may be limited conditions, but you can go on the internet and pay, I think, $200, $100, $200, and get a doctor to virtually telehealth diagnose you with one of these conditions, and bing, bang, boom, you get a license in the mail 3 weeks later, something like that. So people are going to have cards. People are going to continue to get medical cards. So even in the interim between now and when the dispensaries go live in 18 months or 24 months, depending on where we're starting from, the reality is people are going to get cards. And so people are going to be using. So we have to have the ability to make this a flexible, dynamic, fluid process, right? So as HR, I think what I'm advising, especially C-suite folks, are revisit this policy. Do not assume that this is going to stay static. It won't. It's going to be fluid and it's going to change as the culture changes, as the community engagement on this changes. So be aware it's not something that's going to happen and it may need to change more than once. So don't be scared of that. Don't think that's a bad thing. So let me turn to some questions now. I know I have some of the chat, and Mike, thanks for jumping back on so you can help me field some of this. Before I do, I just want to give you a few examples. I told you I was going to give you a few sort of specific examples. These are some questions I've gotten from clients. If I have, and I'm going to give you the question as presented to me, if I have an employee who's getting out of his truck in the morning in the parking lot, and I'm standing next to him, and poof, a cloud of smoke comes out like Cheech and Chong movies, and I am no doubt in my mind, this guy just smoked in his truck. Do I do something about that? Yes, of course we do. You don't have to turn a blind eye to that. It's just like if somebody got out of his truck, and as he got out of his truck, a small bottle of gin went falling onto the street, and you smell his breath and it smells like gin. You're going to take action, right? You're not going to let that person work. You're going to do exactly what you would do if that person seemed to be impaired from alcohol. So Mike, I didn't mean to turn you off, Mike. You can turn your video right back on.
Right.
Sorry,
I got a whole bunch of questions here.
Yeah, so go right ahead.
All right. Thank you.
Jay Kenny's question, the truck driver's question. So for people with CDLs, right? If you have a truck driver who has a CDL license, a commercial driver's license, that is a federal license. So that's when I started in the beginning and I said federal license doesn't get, if you're going to lose a federal license issue, that's going to be a get out of jail free card for employer. If an employee cannot perform their job without a CDL, they're a truck driver, and the CDL says you have to be a clean, cannot use drugs, cannot use marijuana in order to hold that license. That's a problem. That's a conflict. Federal law says you can't do it, then we can't, right? That's a direct conflict. That person's going to lose their CDL. So a CDL person, a person who has to drive for you, the employer, and has to have a CDL because of that job position, they don't get a pass. That's a job requirement. So because it's a federal license. So that is an important one. I'm glad somebody asked that. And go ahead, Mike, with some other ones if you want.
Great, thanks. And we've got a whole bunch, so I'm going to try to, I know it's not in any attorney's nature, but if we can get through as many of these as possible, that would be great. Okay, so crossing state lines. Is it okay to purchase in one state? I guess like alcohol, you're not really supposed to transport it across state lines.
Right.
Real quick, what's the answer on?
No.
I bought I bought it in Delaware, I drove it to New Jersey or vice versa, or Pennsylvania, wherever it's legal or whatever.
So the answer on that is no, technically or not, but it's going to be probably as a practical reality, very similar to the alcohol experience.
Right,
Yeah.
gotcha. What about multi-state employers? We've got a number of them on the phone. They've
Yeah.
got operations here, they got operations in maybe Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, et cetera. One policy, what's the advice?
It can be one policy. It absolutely can be. The biggest thing is going to be to know, it depends on the states, and to know what the specific state law requires, because a lot of time they can be synthesized. I don't see that as a problem, provided you're aware of it and that you're looking at it specifically. Just don't assume they're the same, because they really are not. Maryland is not the same as Delaware. It's not the same as New Jersey. It's not the same as New York. So definitely be aware of that.
Gotcha. So let's see, turning to the chat, and I've got a few others here. Nicole asks, if you have a candidate who does not pass the pre-employment drug test due to medical marijuana, do they have to show you their medical card to prove it?
They sure do. Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Frank. Nicole, it's just like if they had a medical issue that they need an accommodation for, you have the right to get a certification from their medical provider. That's exactly what that card is for. Now, do you have to? Does the law say that you must keep a copy of their medical marijuana card? It does not. But are you allowed to legally, are you allowed to require a candidate or an employee to show you their card to prove it? 100% yes. Now, keep in mind that that card is still a medical document. So in our personnel files, we can't keep medical information in the personnel file, right? So that if you for some reason needed a copy of that, it's going to have to go in that separate medical file, not in the original personnel.
How do employers handle or treat applicants who have marijuana criminal records prior to April 23rd, 2023?
Oh, that's such a great question. That is definitely a social justice question. I will tell you, most of my clients, I don't want to say most, that's too scientific. Many clients have already taken that off the table as a potential disqualifier because it does not relate to the job, the employment. But you're going to have to go through the same EEOC analysis that you would for any other criminal record, meaning if you think that that potentially is disqualifying in any way prior to the time you make that disqualification decision, you're going to have to bring them in and give them the opportunity to explain in a meaningful and interactive way. So you're going to have to treat that the same as any other potentially disqualifying criminal conviction.
Gotcha. Can positive results on a mandatory drug screen be used to eliminate potential hires? I think you addressed this potentially before.
And let me just say, my people, really great HR folks that we have on the line, I know are really in tune with the idea of like, if you do for one, you must do for all, right? So equality across the board. Let me just give you a little side note to that, which is, yes, that's true. But if you have a policy now that you adhere to, and then you change your policy because you can't, it no longer works, right? That it's not functional because society is changing, and you adopt a different standard, that's okay. So don't think that you are making a decision today that is going to lock you in a year. You're allowed to change the policy and make these adjustments as needed.
Any testing on the horizon right now? Unlike alcohol, right now there's really no test for impairment, and we know that marijuana in your system metabolizes at different rates for most people. Most people, it's a couple of weeks that they can test positive. Anything coming?
No, there is not. There is no test. That there's not going to be any test that I have heard about, and I haven't heard from my cannabis working group either, and they're generally in the know, but lots of people are in the know more than I, but I know I have not heard of any quick asking test. And I would think that, you know, we would know by now because Colorado probably would have liked to have had one over the past 15 years to be able to do those sobriety tests. I
agree. I'm in regular contact with the presidents of the Washington State, Colorado Chamber, others, and yeah, the cavalry is not coming. So let's see, other one. How does the use of marijuana recreational and business indoor spaces interfere with the Clean Indoor Air Act? I think we talked about that because it's not cool to be using it. Although the question was recreation, but maybe medical. What about using it at work and the Clean Indoor Act?
That's a very good question. That it is actually a nuanced question, and the answer is it's going to be we're not able to do it due to the Clean Indoor Air Act. So you cannot say, you can have a party at work, right? Remember I told you the analogy works great with alcohol. Here's where it may not, is you can have a party after work and say, we're gonna have cocktails for everyone, or wine is being served at 5 o'clock, or it's beer o'clock, and we're gonna celebrate on Friday. Thanks for a great job, well done. We're gonna have some beers here for people to celebrate in the office. That's not gonna work if you're gonna say, light them up if you smoke them if you got them. That is not gonna work. Just because it's illegal. So if you had an outside space that was not accessible to the public, that is something you could consider, but you cannot allow people to be smoking inside the building for that reason. Yeah.
Great, thanks. What if an applicant with a medical card is considered for a driver position and or transports people? Can the employee handbook include prohibitive language?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Is there an exception for jobs that have safety considerations, construction, et cetera, for medical marijuana?
No, there's not. There's not. The exception is licensing, federal licensing and federal money. Now, the good news is a lot of times those two things overlap, right? So if you are doing large, industrial construction projects, you may be getting some federal licensing, you may be getting some federal money. But if you're not, no, you can make the rules, but you can't invoke an exception that does not exist. Yeah.
I want to let the SHRM members and also the state chamber members, there's a big overlap with all of you. We're engaging in conversations, very preliminary, but what are the health insurance implications to all of this for employers? If an employee is required to carry a firearm and the applicant has a medical marijuana card, can the employer not go forward with the applicant?
It is entirely based on, is there a licensing or does one of the exceptions apply, right? So I have a ton of this with law enforcement clients who, police departments that are actually going down to Dover rather tonight to talk to the Delaware League of Local Government. And there are lots of folks who want to talk about that exact same thing. And the answer is, for law enforcement, there are some exceptions, but not for just because someone's carrying a handgun or a weapon of any kind.
Gotcha. There's another question here.
Someone asked in the chat, if I may, that they asked if for the information on banning use at work, is that for recreational use only? No. Medical marijuana you can't not hire somebody, or you cannot fire somebody merely because they have a card, but you can fire somebody even if it's medical marijuana for use, possession, or impairment at work. So if someone comes in and says, I got to go take a break to consume some marijuana because I have a medical marijuana card, that is a no. You're allowed to say yes if you want, but you are not required to say yes. That is not an exception. You're allowed to prohibit that.
Gotcha. Thank you. There's one here. We're not looking to prohibit recreational use due both to the widespread legalization and the ease of access to medical cards. However, we have safety sensitive positions. That said, knowing there's no test for impairment, what's a good resource for best practices for observations and documenting observations?
Yeah, so that's it. Okay, I can actually send you a couple links on that, that have some resources, and then you can circulate that to your members, Mike, to attendees. I'm happy to do that. But the basic answer is, for now, it is going to be the same as if you ever had like a reasonable suspicion checklist. A lot of clients use those reasonable suspicion checklists where you have two preferably supervisory employees looking at the person and saying, gee, you smell like weed. I saw you get out of your truck and a cloud of smoke came out behind you, and I can smell marijuana, which you normally can if it's smoke because it's odoriferous, and it's pretty odoriferous, but may not be able to if it's a vape or an edible, etc. But if you can see impairment, you check that checkbox and say, I, adult supervisor, saw this, and this is why we sent them home. Same thing is for alcohol. Look, many of my clients, I will say, deal with this situation less so with alcohol and more so with opioids. That if somebody comes to work and they seem to be impaired from pain medicine, they're generally not testing that person in the workplace. They're doing a reasonable suspicion. She's slurring her words. She's you know, her eyes are not focusing, things like that, and then sending them home. That would be the same thing I would say for marijuana use, exactly.
Gotcha, thanks. We've got time for two more and then I've got to wrap up. Question in the chat. We've got an employee that we hired. They failed a drug screen during the pre-employment process. Employee was told they will be tested again in 30 days. Employee shows us a medical card and tests positive for weed again. Can we terminate employment? We hire in Delaware, Pennsylvania. We hire folks who test positive in Delaware, but not in Pennsylvania. Is that okay?
Okay, so there are a couple questions there. Let me do the first one. The first one is no, you cannot. If the person says, I have a medical marijuana card, and you say, great, we're going to need to retest you in 30 days, and they pop hot for marijuana, they get a pass. That's what that card is. That card is a pass. They get a pass. So no, we cannot discriminate against them, meaning we cannot fire them because they test positive if they have a medical marijuana card. No.
Got it. This one's a tricky one. Well, they're all kind of little
Save the tricky ones for the end. Good, Mike.
how do you define reasonable suspicion, and how do you test? How do you handle reasonable suspicion? The line's very gray. How do we determine if someone's under the influence and to be sent home or terminated? Where's the line?
It is extremely difficult, and I'm going to tell you, we're not going to catch it a lot of times, right? So people can vape in their cars at lunch. They can vape in the bathroom. They can have edibles. There are pills. There are pressed THC pills that dissolve under the tongue, right? There are lots of ways to consume it. So we may never know. The question on reasonable suspicion is reasonableness. So you're going to use your common sense. Or does something seem off with the person? What is it? And it will be the same things, many of the same things as alcohol. So is there a smell? Are their eyes not able to focus? Are they slurring their words? Are they not able to concentrate? All the things that you say, there's something wrong. This is not how Molly normally behaves. There's something going on. You just write those down. Now there are checklists, and I'm happy to send you a sample reasonable. Like I said, I'll send you a link for a sample form for reasonable suspicion. But really and truly, it is basically, is there something off? Or are there some things off that about this person's behavior, conduct, appearance, etc.? And if they are, it's about documenting them and writing them down, having preferably two, not one, but preferably two sets of supervisory eyes observe that conduct and be able to document it.
Molly, thank you very much. Let me, before we let everybody go, mention a couple things. But Molly, thank you very much for this. We could have extended this an extra hour. Couple of upcoming events for chamber members, but it's also open to SHRM members if you want to register. We've got our Developing Delaware Conference Thursday, October 5th at the Modern Maturity Center. That's prioritizing live, work, and play. We have a lot of employers who've expressed substantial concerns about housing and finding enough workforce housing, things that are affordable for their employees. We're going to delve deeply into that topic and a bunch of other subjects. We have a networking breakfast at PCS on Thursday, October 12th in Newark. We've got a webinar just like this with Philly Fed President Pat Harker on Friday the 13th. He's on the Fed Open Market Committee. So if you're interested in where interest rates are going, I'm sure he's going to say nothing, but it's always a good conversation with the Fed, the regional Fed president. Finally, our 25th annual Superstars in Business Awards program at the Hotel DuPont is Wednesday, November 8th. Our keynoter is going to be somebody that Molly and I are both familiar with. It's going to be Brian DeSabatino from EDIS. And then finally, our annual dinner, which 1,100 of your closest friends, it is the place to be. It's the largest business and government leadership forum dinner in the state. That's going to be moved in January to Monday, January 29th. Normally, it's a little bit earlier in the month, but our keynoter and presenting sponsor this year had a conflict earlier in the month, so we're moving it to Monday, January 29th. Molly, again, thank you very much. This was very informative. Look forward to seeing some of the other questions and responding to some of those. Thank you all and appreciate your time this morning. Again, I'm Mike Quaranta, President of the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate our partnership with the folks at SHRM and hope you found this informative. Thanks and have a great day, everybody.